So thanks again, everybody, for joining us, signing on to our ransomware horror stories and 4 steps you can take to help protect your organization today. That's one more than promised, but Dave has an extra one for you at the end of today's presentation. I'm Chip Hanlon. I'm with KaufmanIT, head of sales and marketing here. And what you're going to hear today is we are really going to try and give you what we call a full speed webinar. I have an allergy to long, boring meetings and presentations. So we're going to try and be fast paced, give you actionable information. So stay till the end. You're going to hear Dave's insights from horror stories he has seen and take away those 4 things you can do to protect your organization right away. There's a Q&A button if you want to submit questions along the way. Others won't see them, but we will here on this end, and we'll pick the best if there's time permitting at the end of this half hour. But let's get right into it. You see our guest with us today. This is Dave Cunningham of Alvaka Networks. Alvaka is a 40-year-old IT solutions provider that for the past few years has been focusing on helping companies recover from ransomware attacks. So Dave is Alvaka's senior case manager. He has overseen more than 160 ransomware recoveries. Good for him, bad for the rest of us. Sadly, he is in the midst of a raging bull market. And in each of the last 4 years, Dave has led one of the year's top 10 largest data breaches, the ones we read about in the news. So we obviously have the right guy with us today. So I want to get to him quickly. You're not going to hear a lot of the boring statistical rundown from me about the average ransomware that's paid, which can range from $600,000 to $1.5 million, depending on which study you read. You just need to know you're paying for a couple of things. It's ransom's a demand for the decryption keys to your data, but also the suppression of the release of that data, because in over 3/4 of cases, data is exfiltrated. So what you may not know, the only numbers you need to keep in mind, because we really focus on serving smaller and mid-sized businesses here, is it's not just the giants who get hit. Fully half of breaches today are hitting companies that are under $100 million in revenues, but almost 20% of those are companies that are just $1 to $10 million in revenues. Hackers don't discriminate. So hacking has become a business, and despite the fact that most companies understand these risks, it's stunning how many still fail to take the most basic precautions. So Dave, you're in the trenches, you're responding to data breaches every day, and I thought it might help to just first hear some of the realities of what it's like for clients like yours to live through a ransomware attack. So, first, forget the studies. Let's talk about average recovery time. What is it that you've seen in terms of recovery time?
Yeah, thanks, Chip. So what we're seeing, the industry's averages for recovery, meaning that they recovered from the attack and they basically they're back in business with at least their critical applications to be able to run their businesses back up and running. So if the victim firm ends up having to pay a ransom and purchase the decryption keys from the threat actors, the average recovery time is 19 days. But the thing that's kind of counterintuitive is if they don't, it turns out that they have viable backups and they're able to recover from their backups. Still, the average is 12 days.
That's remarkable.
And yeah, so it's really surprising because these are such disruptive attacks that it takes so long to recover and get back up and running. So what I was going to say is that people kind of underestimate, or until you've gone through it, you don't really realize how disruptive these attacks are. Because when the attackers get into the environment, all the systems are down, and so before they can be recovered, the threat actor has to be ejected from the environment, and the network has to be secured and made ready for the recovery. And so we call that containment, containing the threat, securing the network on an emergency basis, same time running in parallel to get the data restored and back up in place. So it's quite the this disruptive event. So it's not a matter of, if you buy a decryption key, being able to enter in a password and the systems spring back to life.
Right.
Yeah.
Before you rebuild the house, you may have to make sure that the burglar and all those tools are actually off the property.
Exactly right.
Okay, so beyond the ransom, which is kind of the headline number, not always disclosed, but when we hear about it, that's the headline. But what are some of the other, the hidden costs that make the true cost of a data breach much more expensive, the ones that companies don't think about beforehand?
Yeah, well, there's really two categories of costs. I call them direct costs and indirect costs. So the direct costs are if there's a ransom paid, there's the fees for the restoration effort. There's legal fees. There can be direct costs for the recovery, but the indirect costs of an attack are often much larger. And that really has to do with business interruption. So if a company is down for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and they're not able to serve their clients, they're not able to ship products, then you have lost revenue due to the business interruption. In some cases, like a manufacturer will have contract performance penalties where they're having to, because they failed to ship, they're having to pay fees. I have one client that was in the auto supply chain, and when they fail to ship product, then manufacturers cannot roll cars off the assembly line. It was $1.2 million a day in contract performance penalties. So we have that. There's also a requirement for notification. So if data is breached, there may be breach notification requirements such that you have to reach out to the individuals by mail, offer credit monitoring services, that kind of thing. Just the mail costs. So for a healthcare organization, they've got 1 million records that are compromised. Just the mail cost is for postage is $600,000. There's
The
fines.
reputational damage. Right?
Right, and the reputational damage. But the other thing that we're seeing is that there's quite a bit of legal liability associated with a compromise like this. There can be class action lawsuits that come after the fact. If you have downstream, if your customers are impacted in their ability to do business, then now you have these consequential damages. And so the liability cost is really the largest of the costs in a ransomware attack.
Okay, so these big breaches, as we said up front, some of which you have led, some of the biggest. I think those, to a degree, cause smaller businesses to think, it's a problem for banks and large hospitals and et cetera. But let's flip to the opposite side. What are some of the smallest breaches you've seen, and do they suffer worst in your?
Yeah. Well, what we're seeing is that from even individuals or firms with 5 people or 10 people are attacked, and they're surprised because they thought that they would not be targeted for an attack. But the thing that people have to realize is that these attacks start off as automated attacks. So the criminals are constantly scanning the internet looking for vulnerabilities, using scripts and bots, and the initial access, the initial compromising of the environment is done on an automated basis. And then once that the initial access is attained, then the human criminals come into play. Then they go in, they steal the data, we call it exfiltrate the data that they can. And then the second thing is then they'll detonate the ransomware payload. But what we're seeing is it's somewhat of an indiscriminate attack across the entire internet. Anybody that's on the internet is susceptible to that initial access.
And the cost of some of these protections is so affordable. It's part of our ongoing message is always to clients, like, let's put at least the core fundamental protections in place. But there's another cost that kind of relates. How does this all relate to, let's say, cyber insurance? And what are you seeing with regards to the cyber insurance industry, premiums, practices, et cetera?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is that the insurance carriers are, because of their loss history, are raising rates for insurance. Now, the thing that's kind of ironic is that in the whole scheme of things, compared to workers' comp, general liability, and other forms of insurance, the cyber liability insurance is still relatively inexpensive compared to the other insurance that business will have. But we do see, a doubling of rates over the last year or so. So that's first thing. The second thing is that the carriers are becoming much more selective and stricter as they're evaluating organizations, if they're going to be able to provide the coverage at all, and if they are, what is it going to cost? And so now what we're seeing is that the insurance applications are becoming much more detailed as far as the questions they're asking around security measures. And and there's a silver lining there too, is because if you take a look at an insurance application and they're asking if certain security measures in place, this is really a good pragmatic checklist.
Nice roadmap.
Yeah, it's a nice roadmap. It's risk-based. It's what the carriers are finding are most material. Another thing that we're seeing too that's happened in the last couple of years is that a company realize that, hey, I want to be able to fill out an application. I want to answer yes, that I have all these measures in place. And so with the idea that it wouldn't really face scrutiny, and I know that if I check yes, it's going to reduce my premium. But what we've seen is that the carriers are coming in, and when a company's been attacked, and it turns out that they did not actually have the measure, they made a, quote, material misrepresentation on the insurance application. So in those cases, carriers are denying coverage for the attack because the measures were not there. And we are seeing that those decisions are being upheld in court. So it's very important to be, to candid and honest on, just because you can't answer yes to every security measure on the application doesn't mean that you're not going to get the insurance.
Right.
But it's very important to be as candid as you can in filling out an insurance app.
Clients and prospective clients bring us these questionnaires frequently. We have a lot of relationships in the cybersecurity industry. My understanding is the more questions you can answer yes to, it's not necessarily about lowering costs from what we've seen. It's about potentially doing that slightly by being able to go to a wider range of potential carriers. But yeah, you got to be honest on those apps. And it's funny, I wonder how many past applications, kind of legacy applications, are out there that aren't so honest and may have problems coverage wise.
Well, and the other thing that we're learning too is that whether somebody has insurance or not, these attacks are so painful. The fact that you're going to get some you're going to get reimbursement from an insurance carrier is kind of a cold comfort. Because the real pain just comes from the reputational loss, the disruption to the business, the loss of 3 weeks of your life, 3 or 4 weeks of your life, where the business does nothing but try to focus on recovering from this attack. So whether people have insurance or not, attacks are to be avoided.
Yeah, small solace. Okay, so let's pivot to the solutions we promised. You say you've got 4 from us. I know you're sometimes surprised at some of the steps companies aren't taking. Give us your top 4 steps that companies should be doing right now.
Well, and this is really a good question, because what we're seeing, we often go into organizations, they have big investments in security. They've implemented all these measures, and in spite of doing all that, they're still fully compromised. And so what we have to understand is that not all security measures are created equal. In other words, my opinion is that you take a look at the measures that give you 80% of the results, the 20% of the measures that give you 80% of the results, and do those first, rather than being overwhelmed with a checklist of 15 to 20 items. If you take a look at an insurance application, it's 15 or 20 items. Are you doing this? So I think it's really important to focus on those measures that give you the most, bang for your buck, that are the most effective, and do those first. So I'll just go through them very quickly. The first one, and these are, what's ironic is, as I list these out, these are things we've all heard about, but I just want to emphasize that even though we've heard about them, these are the ones that we seem to be most material in being able to prevent ransomware attacks. So the first one is multi-factor authentication, or 2-factor authentication. So And when we talk about multi-factor authentication, we're talking about multi-factor for all applications. So people will say, well, I've got multi-factor authentication in Office 365. They don't have all their applications protected, but they have certain applications. The idea is that we want to have multi-factor authentication for all remote access for sure, for any user, and then for all administrative access. So what this means is that if a network administrator sits down at the keyboard of a server to work on the server, and he goes to log into that server and he's sitting at the server, he should still receive an MFA prompt. He should have to authenticate with multi-factor to get into the server. And the reason why that, and there's a whole discussion that there's so many aspects of the attack chain that will be impeded if multi-factor is in place. So, and when we go into our recovery, one of the first things we do is implement multi-factor for everything. It's really effective in blocking even an active threat actor in the environment. By threat actor, we mean the criminal actor. So that's first.
To be clear, it's the simplest example is you type your username and password, and then you get an alert on your phone. Is this really you? That's the second factor.
Yeah, just like your banking sites where you go to log in your site and now you have to get a PIN. And there's ways to implement this so that is very easy for a user to be able to use, to adopt, and get used to. And we're already starting to get used to multi-factor authentication. So that is the first one. The second one I'm going to give you right now, I'm going to say that this is the most effective of all. If you only do one thing, this would be the one thing to do. And that is to have what's called, it's called security monitoring, but essentially you have EDR, which is endpoint detection and response, and XDR for extended detection and response, monitored by a 24-hour security operations center. So of all the things that we get, the idea is that no matter how much we try to secure our networks, it's always going to be imperfect. There's always going to be gaps. We may have a lot of gaps. We may have very few gaps. It'll never be perfect. And so the nice thing about the security monitoring is the ability to detect an attack in progress and block that attack. And it's very important that it's not just a technology tool where you say, okay, well, I have Huntress or I have Carbon Black or SentinelOne EDR, not to just have the technology tool, but you have to have humans monitoring these tools at 3 o'clock in the morning. So when the attack hits, that the attack then ends up getting blocked versus somebody, receives somebody gets an email or a text, and by that time it's kind of too late. So having the EDR, XDR monitored 24/7 is by far, and I just had an attack. I was talking to Chip day before yesterday, and they had been fully compromised about 18 months ago. And they went through the whole recovery, and then they made all these investments in security. And then 2 days ago, we get a call, we're brought in, and this company is completely attacked again using Lockbit. The threat actor is Lockbit 3.0. And it turns out they had done put in place all these security measures, except for the one thing that they needed, which was the security monitoring. And the idea was they were going to get their house in order and perfectly cleaned up, and then they were going to do the monitoring at the end. So
you're saying do it first.
Do it first, because then you can drastically reduce the risk while you're in the process of implementing in the other security measures that you need to. So my thought is that's the most effective thing you can do. Do that one first.
Awesome. Okay. Watching the clock here. We're getting a little tight on time versus our promise. What are the next two?
Okay, two more. So very quickly is that when it comes to your backup and recovery systems, these need to be have a feature called immutability. So in other words, they are immutable. It means it's impossible for a threat actor to delete the backups. That's what they try to do, is delete the backups, or even a rogue backup administrator working for the company. They can delete backups. So by implementing immutable backups, and certain products like Veeam are not immutable by default. They can be set up to be immutable, but it does have to be set up properly. and then to test those backups. So, and then the fourth thing has to do with email security. So what I was going to say was that what we're seeing these days in the last 12 months, less and less of the attacks are, quote, phishing attacks. Many of these attacks are occurring without any human error on anybody clicking on an email, and yet the organization does get attacked. However, about 25% of attacks are still phishing attacks. So people think that because they have Office 365, that the email is secure, and the answer, it is not. The Office 365 tenant is not hardened by default. So the last thing we'd say is to get your email security in line, in order. So those are the four.
Awesome. Thanks. So got Darren next to me. How do I share this little link? I'm going to put a link in chat here. Okay, Nemex Toolbox. Great. Go ahead and throw that in. We're going to throw a link in here. Okay, so piggybacking off of what Dave was talking about on that fourth point, email hardening. I'm going to talk to everybody a little bit about that one here. I'm going to share screens for just a moment. And you should see here the site that we're about to send a link to. Is it in the chat there, Darren?
Yep.
Great. Zemex Toolbox. This is a way to get some quick insights on a URL of a business. Some of our engineers use it when we're getting to know a client. I'm going to give everybody here a chance right now, in the privacy of their own browser. Every attendee can check to find whether they have healthy email security settings or not, or at least get a sense of whether they do. So just go ahead and plug into this box right here your URL. So as you've seen here, I've thrown in ours here at KaufmanIT. And if you see a series of 3 check marks, I'll explain what DMARC is in just a moment. If you see a series of 3 green check marks, it means somebody, that doesn't happen by accident, someone has thoughtfully gone in and taken care of at least this one of what we consider to be 11 key email security settings. If, on the other hand, you pop in here and you get a set of orange and red check marks, you don't necessarily have a disaster on your hands, but it means DMARC's not set up properly. Now, what is DMARC? It is one of the email settings that has to do with preventing some spoofing on your domain, and in combination with some of the other settings that relates to email deliverability. For most of our new clients, we recommend that they go through what we call an email security hardening process, where we examine all of their email securities. Again, it's an 11-point inspection, for lack of a better way of saying it. And we go through and get them fully tuned up just to be sure that there aren't any small gaps in terms of security, deliverability, etc. So if yours looks like this, as you're checking it out now, I'm going to give you an offer. This is work we do on behalf of clients, but we'll also do it on behalf of non-clients on a project basis, this email security hardening, and it starts with an audit. So this page that you see here, you mind throwing that link in there too, Darren? Our email security audit page is, you'll see, we normally just charge a nominal fee for this thing. And for attendees on this webinar, we're going to make that $195. It's really not about the charge. It's actually just to make sure that we have some buy-in from the client side, that they actually have a little skin in the game, because they do need to give us some network access in order to examine all of their settings. And once we do it, we'll go in and give you a full report on the rest of DMARC, DKIM, SPF, all the rest of the email settings, to let you know how you look. And, if you'd like us to fix it, we apply the cost of this audit to the project. But this is one really simple way. You're staring at it right now. All of you attendees, you either have the sense that maybe your email hasn't been really thoughtfully set up, or it's nice and clean. I don't know what you're seeing there, but if you have a little bit of an issue, you should feel free and give us a shout through that webpage that Darren has put in. So let's see, we're at 11:25, so we went 3 minutes over on the presentation, but it means we have up to 5 minutes for questions. Let me take a quick peek. Got one in here. Ooh, that's kind of a repeat of something we talked here. Let's see. Okay, this might have been related to something you said. I heard that companies that get hit by ransomware are actually more likely to be attacked again. Is that true? That's interesting. Is that true from what you've seen, Dave?
I think that once they've been hit, and they've gone through a successful restoration, and they've implemented the measures and hardened the networks. No, however, when a company has been hit, they're very much at risk of being reattacked in the first couple of weeks. And the reason is because the threat actor is in the environment. They already have access. What we do see is that we think there's over an 80% reattack rate. So in the first month, if an organization actually has not hardened their network and they just reimaged their workstations, reimaged their servers, or did whatever and came back up, and they didn't go through a rigorous containment exercise, then it's almost I would say 100% chance that you're going to get reattacked. And we often come in on the second reattack. So they moved heaven and earth to come back up. They got back up in operation. Two to 4 weeks later, they're reattacked by the same threat actor. So yes, in that case. But if they do a strong recovery, a strong containment, then they're more secure after the attack. And insurance companies don't seem to be denying coverage for people that have been attacked in the past. They figure hey, they're a better risk, right? They're a better risk.
Interesting. Okay, here's another. Are there any warning signs that a ransomware attack may be imminent? I bet those differ.
Well, so the warning signs, so if you've got monitoring, the security monitoring, then you're getting all sorts of alarms and alerts and all of that. Certainly, what'll happen, a lot of times, if a threat actor is in the environment, it's called dwell time. So they'll get in, say 2 to 4 weeks prior to you knowing that you're attacked. And what people will see is they'll see network slowdowns because the criminals are exfiltrating the data. It's like, why is my firewall choked up with traffic? And it's because they're actually stealing the data out. They're trying to do it clandestinely. So that's a warning sign. Seeing just odd behaviors of passwords being changed is an odd behavior. Seeing excessive failed login attempts on servers as they're trying to do dictionary attacks to gain access. So they can sometimes be a little bit noisy. However, they're trying to be as stealthy as they can. But odd behavior and unusually slow performance are certainly signs of an impending attack.
And then we are almost out of time to get everybody under this half hour. But the question I see here is how ransomware negotiations typically handled. From what we've seen here, it's Bitcoin.
Yeah, so they're settled in Bitcoin, but the negotiation with the threat actor is really important part of a case. Even if you don't plan to pay the ransom, where the idea is we're going to recover from backup, there still is a negotiation going on with the threat actor because they're trying to capture valuable information that will inform the legal notifications. Number one, see what have they stolen. Also, by negotiating with the threat actor, that kind of slows them down. They're not motivated to reattack you if they think that they're going to get paid. So the negotiation happens regardless if ultimately a decision is made to pay the ransom.
Awesome. You nailed it. We're 11:29. We're going to get everybody out of here in the half hour as promised. Thanks so much. Again, this was Dave Cunningham, the Senior Case Manager at Alvaka Networks. We hope that the horror stories didn't scare you too much. Say again. We have another question that we're going to have to let it rip, unfortunately. I'll answer this one offline. We're going to get everybody out of here as promised. I'm big into that.
Okay, guys.
So thanks a lot, Dave, for joining us. Again, I'm Chip Hanlon with KaufmanIT. If you've seen that you have potential email settings issues, just ping us. I know who attended the webinar. We'll give you that special rate. We'd be happy to help you. And thanks again, everybody who joined us. Thanks again, Dave.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Take care, everybody.